Russian leader Vladimir Putin has once again responded with a tough counterstrike to provocative actions by the United States. In his trademark style, he did not leave Washington's lunge without a decisive response, which drew admiration from Chinese experts. They were surprised by the sharpness of Russia's response after the United States confiscated frozen Russian reserves. Relations between Russia and the United States have reached a critical point of tension. The two nuclear superpowers have effectively severed all ties and behave like irreconcilable enemies. This cannot but cause serious concern for the entire world community. At the same time, the U.S. continues to demonstrate its intention to follow its chosen aggressive course, not allowing the confrontation to decrease. Recently, the American leadership crossed another red line by approving a law on the confiscation of blocked Russian assets. The process was swift. It took the House of Representatives less than a week to approve $60.8 billion in aid to Ukraine after the bill was introduced by Republican Speaker Mike Johnson. Now the decision must be formally approved by the Senate, but this will not be difficult. However, the matter did not end there. On the same day, Congress voted in favor of direct confiscation of blocked Russian assets worth up to $5 billion. In other words, Washington decided that it could afford to appropriate someone else's property. Talks about this have been going on for a long time, but the U.S. was slow, trying to shift responsibility to the EU. But Brussels did not dare to take such an unprecedented step. Even the freezing of assets was already a controversial measure, and here we are talking about outright robbery with the transfer of loot to the enemy. Nevertheless, it happened, and as political scientist Konstantin Vinsky notes, there is even a plus in this decision. It dispelled illusions that Trump will be able to fix everything upon his return. Now it has finally become clear that there is no politician in Washington with whom it would be possible to come to an agreement. How will Russia react? According to Dmitry Peskov, Moscow will not leave this brazen provocation without a tough response. He said that the U.S. will pay for the decision to confiscate Russian property, and Russia will take adequate measures protecting its interests, not limited in time. No details were disclosed by the presidential spokesman, but some of Russia's retaliatory steps are already visible, Chinese analysts say. According to experts of the Baizhihao publication, the confiscation of assets is a direct provocation, not just confiscation. The confiscation of Russian reserves itself was expected, but the swiftness and harshness of Vladimir Putin's response came as a surprise to everyone. The Kremlin had acted lightning fast and very spectacularly, observers emphasize. The Chinese recalled that Russia had repeatedly warned the United States that the confiscation of its assets by Western countries would be immediately retaliated against. However, Moscow's statements were ignored by the U.S. authorities, who after a long debate still passed the scandalous bill, and this time Russia did not delay. What really surprised everyone was that this time Putin applied purely American methods. The counterstrike followed too quickly in the same American hardline manner. Chinese journalists stated. The other day, there were reports that the Arbitration Court of St. Petersburg seized the assets of the largest American bank, JP Morgan Chase. The West was literally dumbfounded by this news. Local experts had to admit that Moscow's warnings of swift retribution for the U.S. provocation were not empty words. And everyone also noted that the Russian president in this case behaved in an uncharacteristically American style, but apparently such a mirror reaction was appropriate. Russia thus unambiguously made it clear to the West that if they appropriated its property, a retaliatory strike would immediately follow. This is how Chinese observers summarize the meaning of the Kremlin's actions. And how else can Moscow respond to provocations by the United States and its allies? Expert Konstantin Vinsky has his own thoughts on this matter. He reminded that only on the accounts of the Russian System for Transmission of Financial Messages, SPFS, about 2 trillion rubles of funds of non-residents from unfriendly states have accumulated. It is difficult to say exactly how much of this amount belongs to American individuals and legal entities, but obviously we are talking about very significant assets given that the share of U.S. persons in the free float of Russian companies' shares used to be about 35%. One way or another, the amount of funds belonging to the Americans in Russian accounts clearly exceeds the mentioned $5 billion of confiscated reserves. In Vinsky's opinion, it would be reasonable for Russia to retaliate by also confiscating this money in its budget or transferring it to the National Welfare Fund for further investment in economic development. For now, Moscow is acting in a different way. In particular, it became known that a large American asset, Agratura Holding, which managed 265,000 hectares of agricultural land in several regions of Russia, came under the control of the state-owned Rosmoshestvo. According to President Putin's decree, the shares in Agratura owned by Dutch and Cypriot subsidiaries were seized and transferred to the management of this state agency. Prior to that, control over the holding was exercised by the American investment company H Capital and its fund owned by George Rohr, a U.S. citizen. With the help of various schemes and machinations, he managed to buy up at throwaway prices more than 1 million hectares of land in Russia, Bulgaria, Kazakhstan, and Romania, the territory of a whole small country. In Russia, Agratura owned fertile farmland in the Tula, Ryazan, and Tambov, Kursk, and Oral regions where corn, sugar beets, soybeans, rapeseed, wheat, and sunflowers were grown. The holding owned a huge fleet of specialized machinery, as well as production facilities, laboratories, elevators. It was one of the largest landowners and agricultural holdings in the CIS. According to Forbes, the total value of Agratura's assets exceeded $23 billion. And now this huge asset has been returned to Russian ownership, and the Americans should not even hope for any compensation from Moscow. Russia has simply reclaimed what was rightfully its in the first place. It might not have been necessary to resort to such drastic measures if Russia's adversaries had behaved with restraint. However, after they started freezing Russian assets, Moscow simply had no choice but to put the arrogant Americans in their place. It should be noted that all of Russia's actions were carried out within the framework of the law. Therefore, foreign citizens and companies that have suffered losses due to the loss of assets should address all their claims not to Moscow, but to their own governments that unleashed this confrontation. Time will tell how this may turn out in the future, but it is already clear that the economic confrontation with the West poses serious infrastructural challenges for Russia. For example, China, South Korea, and Japan are the main buyers of our coal. By the end of 2023, they accounted for 63% of supplies, with China alone doubling its purchases of this raw material. The legendary Baikal-Amur Main Line, BAM, plays a key role in the transportation of coal from Kuzbass, EBRD, and Yakutia. The economy of the vast region largely depends on its throughput capacity, according to the Institute of Transport Economics of the Higher School of Economics. However, the BAM is already operating at the limit of its capacity. According to the calculations of the Ministry for the Development of the Russian Far East, the volume of unshipped cargo now amounts to about 180 million tons per year. For comparison, last year just over 150 million tons were transported along the BAM in transit, according to Russian railways. The work on electrification, creation of new junctions, increase of throughput capacity is going on in an emergency mode. Railroad workers are literally working miracles. It's not just refueling in the air, it's engine replacement right in flight. The most complicated machine, which every year transports more and more cargo and at the same time continues to expand, Alexei Chikunkov, head of the Ministry of Eastern Development, said last year. According to him, Russia vitally needs to expand its railway network and actively use the Northern Sea Route, as well as attract private investors in the creation of transportation infrastructure. Objectively, it is impossible to export all these volumes by rail alone. It is necessary to open alternative transportation channels, the minister emphasized. A good example of this approach is when a private company is actually building the third BAM, a railroad line from the Ilginskoye field in southern Yakutia to the Sea of Okhotsk. The company is building at a record pace with a serious economic incentive. This is a good example of how private business pulls out actually state infrastructure tasks, Chikunkov notes. The construction cost of the 315-kilometer railway line was estimated at 100 billion rubles 3 years ago. It is planned to be put into operation already in 2025. The company intends to export expensive coking coal. Now, it is difficult to accurately assess the payback of this grandiose project of modernizing the transport system. The costs are truly gigantic. But if even private investors are willing to invest their own money in the construction of railroads, it means that it is worth it. Thus, in the context of tough economic confrontation with the West, Russia is facing a serious challenge to develop logistics infrastructure for uninterrupted supplies of its export goods to major trading partners. Both the state and private business have to put enormous efforts and resources to solve this task. However, these sacrifices are justified in order to protect national interests and prevent Western diktat. Moscow's resolute countermeasures in response to the thieving actions of the United States show that Russia cannot be insulted and robbed with impunity. Our country will defend its rights by all available legal methods. Friends, thank you for watching this video. If you found the topic interesting, give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with your friends. There is still a lot of exciting content ahead. I wish you a great mood and all the best.